Welcome to the next video in the series. Today what we're going to go through is how to connect Pandas to the MySQL server that we installed. So the first thing that we want to do is come up to System Preferences, to our MySQL icon, and we want to make sure that the MySQL server is actually active. You can see that my instance is not active because of this red dot, so we're going to click on Start MySQL Server. It'll prompt you for your password, your Mac password, and now it's running. So we can close that. The next thing we should do is open up the workbench, and let's just make sure that we have the employees database and everything is looking good here. This quick command, use employees, just means to use the employees database. And when we run this, you can see that it's now highlighted, which means that we have currently selected the employees database. So as long as the server is running, you can get into your workbench and you can select the employees table and everything looks good. You got all your tables in here. Then we should be good to go. The next thing is that we're going to be using the Jupyter Notebook for these tutorials. And the Notebook's a really handy tool to be interactive with Python. You can run each individual cell. You can run individual lines of code. You can look at different plots. It's a lot easier to do data analytics in a Jupyter Notebook rather than a text editor like let's say Atom. So that's why we're going to use this. If you don't have it, I suggest installing the Anaconda distribution. If you just Google Anaconda, actually I'll put the link in the description, but it's a pretty easy install and it's really handy. It comes with a lot of pre-installed libraries, which will make your life easier without having to install all the data analytics libraries. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is import OS. We'll also import the MySQL connector. We'll import Pandas. Import NumPy. We'll also import matplotlib. We'll import Seaborn as well. And the last thing we'll do is enter in matplotlib inline. And what that's going to do is print out the graphs inline rather than us telling it to explicitly print them. It'll just do it for us. So let's just run this and it should compile, and that just means that you have all your packages and we should be ready to move on. So the next thing we're going to do is I've stored all the database credentials in environment variables, and the reason why I did that is, one, it just shows that you're just aware about security. So you don't really want to put database credentials in any kind of script, especially if you're putting your scripts on GitHub or anywhere where it's public. It's also just good practice, especially if you're building web applications and other things to do with coding. So if you don't know how to do that, you can Google that. It's a really simple task. If not, you can still follow along. You can enter your credentials. I just wanted to show you how I was doing it because it is a good practice. So we'll do username is equal to OS. And I call that to DB user. The next thing we're going to do is make the connection object. So connection is equal to MySQL.connector.connect, and here's where we're going to enter in our credentials. So the host server is on localhost, so we'll type in host equals localhost. Next thing we'll type in is user, which would be your username. So I have that in the environment variable, but if you don't have an environment variable, you can just type in strings what your username is. The next we can do is password, and that is equal to password. Again, if you don't have environment variables, you can just type in your password in strings. And we're going to use the employees database. Okay. So when we run this, we should create a connection object, and good. So we can see that it's connected by just typing in connection, and we can see that we have created this connection and everything should be working fine. So in the last video, we talked a bit about the employees database schema, and what we talked about is how that can help you navigate the database and the constraints and how the information in the database is related. But you're not always going to have that schema diagram to help you. So a way you can go around that is using SQL commands to show you the tables in the database and then to show you the constraints in those tables. So the first thing we're going to do is use the show tables from employees SQL query, and that's going to pull out all the tables for us. So we can do employees tables, pd.read SQL query, and this function takes in a SQL query, show tables from employees, and it also takes in the connection. So we can run that, and we'll also print this out just to show you. And what this did was this function ran this SQL query, and it selected all the tables and it put that into this variable, which is also a data frame. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a series of all these names from this data frame so that we can loop through it and call the describe query to get us all the information on the constraints and the schema of the tables. So what we can do is we can go tables is just equal to employees tables, and because this is a data frame, we can just select the first column, and that's going to create a series called tables that's just essentially a list of all these names. So we can loop through this. So for table names in tables, we're just going to run a describe SQL query on each one of these table names. So it's just going to be the same thing. So pd.read SQL query, and the SQL query is just going to be describe, and it's going to be a formatted string, and we're going to pass in the table name. We're just going to call this variable table name just to be a little more clear, and we're also going to pass in the connection. The next thing we're going to do is just print the table name so that we know what we're looking at, and we'll also print the output as well as we'll just print a blank line as well, just for some formatting. So when we run this, we can see that we've looped through all the tables and we've called the describe query on each one of these table names. So the output here, we'll look at the employees table, and what you can see is that it's given us the field, which is also the same thing as the attributes. It's given us the data type that each of the attributes takes. It gives us a constraint, whether or not the variable can be null, and we also are given the key of the table. So we can see that there's employee number, birth date, first name, and so on. We can see that the employee number takes on an integer, birth date takes on a date. Gender is interesting because it can only take on the values of M and F for male and female. The constraint, we can see here that none of these values can be null. So if you try to do an update or an insert, these values, each one of these attributes must have a value, otherwise it's not going to work. And the last thing, which is it's pretty important, it's telling you that the employee number is the primary key of this table. Now this is pretty simple. I mean, it should be obvious that the employee number is the primary key of the employees table, but for instance, when we look at salaries, you can see that the from date is also a primary key of this table in addition to the employee number. That might not be so obvious, so sometimes it is important to run these commands just to give you a little bit more information about the constraints and the attributes, as well as just the schema that's available to you. So I think that wraps it up for this video. So I hope that's helpful, just to give you some more information about the database that you're working with. And in the next video, we're going to start using some more SQL to actually start pulling out data from the database and putting those into data frames and looking at how to graph and do some analytics.